video, I want to explore shame. And this is a little bit of context. My sweetie's helping my foot and leg to wake up again after it went numb while making the last video on fear. And shame is it is a traumatic state, and I'll explain why. First of all, trauma is anything that activates the traumatic circuit of the brain, which, as I understand it, is the reptilian brain, number one. Number two, trauma is anything that threatens our sense of survival. Now, the key thing is our sense. And this makes it entirely subjective because one person can be threatened by a very big thing and little things don't bother another person. It's very erratic. Sometimes the smallest thing sets off an interesting chain reaction within the psyche and memory of a person. And as a result, you do not want to gauge your emotions based on your own rational assessment of the situation. You want to gauge your emotions by the intensity of your own feelings. And the reason that shame is almost always a traumatic event is this. Deep in our biology, as biological mammals for millions of years, we know with certainty that we cannot survive without the support and good wishes of our fellow human beings. We are pack animals. Monkeys are pack animals. We are pack mammals. And so isolation, particularly isolation through shame, will frequently trigger the traumatic center of the brain with the message, you cannot survive without these people. And what shame is a message that you are fundamentally flawed. Feeling ashamed, like, gee, I just made a mistake, I'm sorry, and that being accepted, is not traumatic. And it's healthy, and it's important. It's part of attuning to community. Being shamed, the message that you are fundamentally unlovable, unworthy of being protected, uncared for, that is a traumatic event. And the reason that it is traumatic is that biological memory, that sense that for our basic human needs of belonging, loving and being loved, as well as safety, security, and pleasure, we need one another. When we shame ourselves, when we decide that we are unforgivable, unlovable, it is a traumatic event. A traumatic event overwhelms the emotional and physical system, which is why trauma requires support and help to heal and resolve. And a traumatic and this is another area of crisis, because shame simultaneously gives the message that we don't belong, that we're not welcome, and that we therefore cannot get the help that we need to resolve that trauma, because shame is the message that it is fundamental, that who we are is not lovable and acceptable. So shame is very, very serious. If you are having thoughts that you don't deserve love and belonging, that there is something fundamentally wrong with you, you desperately need help. But the fact that you desperately need help and support to deal with that does not mean that the culture or the people around you are safe, healthy people to deal with shame. Shame itself has been, in the most unhealthy and self-destructive of all possible scenarios within a culture, made shameful. So as soon as you say that you are shameful for feeling shameful or being shamed, you are now in a very dangerous loop that will activate the reptilian brain, the sociopathic brain, and it moves into manipulation and performance to try and navigate with secrets and all kinds of things to get out. But the reptilian brain is a very dehumanizing brain. It's a sociopathic state, and many Western people are in a sociopathic state a lot of the time to varying degrees. We are a very sociopathic culture. Among the 10,000 languages and cultures, America in particular is among the more sociopathic of those cultures. Russia deals with a lot of the same thing. But I would suggest a couple of things. One, read Brené Brown. Two, the channel Lazarus has done a couple of audio cassettes on shame. And just as a very quick shortcut, my way of working with any material is I don't care the source. I care about the quality of the material and if it works. So if a teenager tells me a bunch of things and they work and they make sense to me, I use them. If a Harvard professor tells me a bunch of things, they don't make any sense, they don't line up with what feels right or intuitive, and particularly if I try them and they don't work, I don't use them. So don't worry about the source. Worry about, does it work? Is it helpful? Am I learning something? Is it helping me accept, love, and respond to who I am at a deeper level? And that is, I think, a great metric. There are four packages of shame. Ending shame, which is kind of infantile shame. Then there's the psychic contracts of pain. Then there's another wave with shame in the adolescent and adult shame. And shame is one of our biggest cultural toxins, and it is viral, and it is killing us. Shame is a very, very dangerous emotion to get stuck in. Not remorse, not sadness for our mistakes or our impact, but the sense of shame itself, the sense of being unlovable, not belonging, not welcome. And this is, it's a very big grief, because shame, the way shame is slicing us up in America is it's more nuanced. Innocence is sliced up and humiliated. You know, you have your purse stolen. It's like, you idiot, you shouldn't have carried so much money in your purse. There's no anger at the thief at all. No anger is going towards the criminal, the abuser, the violator. The anger is at you for being innocent enough to be abused. Now, this is consistent as a pattern. Children who are raped are shouted at, are disbelieved, are seen as an embarrassment, are lectured, why did you not say this, why didn't you do this? victims of bullying. Why didn't you beat the other person? Basically, by shaming the victim of abuse, first you have the shame of being abused and no one protecting you. And then you are shamed for being abused. And it's devastating. So innocence is being abused. Naivete is being hacked away at by comedians and sitcoms, and everyone's laughing, whether it's Survivor or the different reality shows. It's very, very cruel and unkind. Warmth and generosity is devalued. Wit and sociopathic cleverness is overvalued. In other words, we are such a traumatized culture that there's almost an envy and an admiration for people who are totally and effectively ruthless. It's almost like we're saying, okay, we've given up on the idea that this culture should be or could be decent, kind, and loving. It is dangerous. And all that we admire in such a sick and dangerous environment are the people who are most ruthless, clever, and sociopathic at manipulating others and the environment effectively. And that is a shame-based culture. But it is the message. The cool sociopath is often who the warm, gentle man in high school or whatever often admires, seeks to be. Brené Brown, John Bradshaw, the channel Lazarus, and the Shame Tapes, these are good places to start to be kind and gentle to the terrain. Brené has done some TED Talks you can watch on YouTube. And the other areas are, for example, being sensitive. Sensitivity is shamed. It's shamed more in men than in women. But when your sensitivity, when you care, it is an incredibly vulnerable thing to care. And when that is ripped apart, ignored, humiliated, discounted, or attacked, like I have people telling me, cut it out. What do you mean? Why do you care about that? As if somehow there's something wrong about caring about humanity, about another human being. Something weird and unnatural that I, as a man, would care about another child, another this, another that. That isn't my job. Well, I think this is profoundly inhuman. I think this is why we are in the state that we are in, is that not enough people care about things that lie outside their very, very narrow sense of self and responsibilities. I think we have a responsibility to participate in creating the kind of world and reality we want to live in. And that means taking a stand for the gentleness in another, for the kindness in another, for the generosity in another. And that can be a very healing and liberating medicine for shame. I found it very healing to take a stand for a young woman who I saw being abused and shamed repeatedly, and just saying, no, not on my watch. This is not going to keep happening because I can do something about it. And I did. It's very difficult to navigate those waters within Western culture, and this needs thought and consideration and conversation and depth. Another thing that gets shamed is feelings, femininity, being emotional, being responsive, being affected, is devalued. The emotional self is valued at about 20 cents on the dollar in the United States, maybe 30. The sociopathic cleverness that makes lots of money or manipulates people effectively is overvalued. That tells us that we are a culture in crisis. But what it also means is that some of the most vulnerable and tender parts of us as human beings are being shamed and devalued, are not welcome and wanted. One of the reasons for this is that we are actually empathic human beings, and if someone is very warm, very kind, and very intimate with us, it will evoke deep feelings in us. And if those deep feelings threaten to bring up fear, terror, trauma, or shame, the response is often to push away and reject the warmth and the tenderness. In doing so, our vulnerability is getting the message it's not welcome. That is a traumatic experience for that part of ourselves. See, because there's the whole part of ourselves being unwanted and unwelcome, and that is deeply traumatic. But there is also a sadness and a smaller trauma for every single part of us that is not welcome. The naive part, the innocent part, the uneducated part, the silly part, the playful part, the caring part, the vulnerable part, the loving part, the silly and unconscious part, the part that doesn't look good within the sociopathic cool framework. That whole comment, cool. Warmth is emotion, cool is sociopathic. When warmth and femininity in both men and women are unilaterally rejected, and coolness, people with no emotion, people who act strategically and effectively without feeling, are elevated. Again, it's sending a signal. This is a sick culture that needs medicine. It needs diagnosis. It is a traumatized culture. But it is nonetheless us in various states that feel the shame that we are not cold, the shame that we are warm. The warmer parts within us, the very healthiest parts, feel the sadness and the shame that both the sadness and the warmth are not welcome. When someone does not want to see us in our depth of experience, there is shame. There is a sense that it is desired that we are invisible. This is painful when that pain is not welcome, is minimized and deflected. There is a sense of shame that my heart, my feelings are not welcome. This is the biggest disease that I know of in America, that our heart, in its tenderness, vulnerability, complexity, sensitivity, and nuance, is not welcome, is actively and with great hostility, derision, and humiliation rejected. It creates a very, very deep wound. And when that wound is itself shamed, humiliated, discounted, and denied, the wound goes silent. But what we're left with is a sense of dread, that there's an enormous level of pain there, and that pain is not welcome. This is a pain that I believe underlies a lot of the compulsive behavior and a lot of the acting out the adaptive strategies, which on some level we know are phony, and this can create a new level of shame, the shame of the imposter, the shame that this is not who I really am. And this can get linked to the abuse in childhood and in adulthood that then says, I'm an imposter and who I really am is not lovable because the depth and tenderness of who I really am is not welcome. So this is the wound of shame. And healing that wound involves having all of who we are seen, validated, and welcome. We need that from at least one human being to satisfy the otherwise traumatic aspect of having who we are denied and rejected. But we also need that from a spiritual, I'll call it a non-human source. And the reason for that is the fragility and imperfection of human love. Now, I don't think the religion matters. I'm not religious at all. I think most of the religions have bungled it with all their politics and can cause a great deal of harm. But any open-minded scientist who realizes just how big reality is can at the very least allow for the probability of consciousness as intelligent as our own and much more so in existence on all kinds of different dimensions. And every year as science progresses, it gets closer to embracing. It's embraced non-locality. It's embraced the dance between matter and energy. It's embraced the impact of the observer upon reality, the fact that one cannot actually be a total observer. In particular, we're looking at quantum physics. And every year, the history, the very founding of science by René Descartes through numbers and measures given to him in his diary, he wrote that the vision of the formation of modern science was given to him by an angel. Now, I think that whatever the cultural paradigm is, the gift from the other, the gift from what is bigger than us, comes within the pictures and languages that make sense to us. So if you're Christian, it'll be an angel. If you're Buddhist, maybe it'll be Buddha. If you're non-religious, maybe it'll be a flying saucer. Maybe it'll be a flower. Maybe it'll be a light. I see a lot of geometric lights, but it's not the image that's that important. The image should be beautiful and meaningful, and it always is. But the feeling is one of peace, of love, of gratitude, of connection. The feeling is one of belonging, of support, and of great grace and compassion. And that's what matters. Because I have yet to have a single part of myself judged, rejected, denied, shamed, abused, and humiliated from one of those bigger energies. And I have yet to find a single human being who can accept, love, understand, embrace, and create an ideal environment for me to express all that I am. So just that reality that having hung out with some pretty neat people in all kinds of metaphysical and New Age and alternative and very positive sectors, and from the community at Findhorn in Scotland to Waldorf schools to channeled places to therapists, and never met a single human being that is capable and willing to love, understand, accept, care, and provide an optimal environment for me to express all that I am. It's not even usually 10% of that. Sometimes 20, sometimes 30. In my best relationship ever, where we worked harder than anyone that I know that, at all, I think we got it up to around 70, 80%. But that is rare. And I heard all the time when people saw us and heard us together how rare that was. And that was just 80%. And so when you realize that there's consciousness that can do that, at least in the accepting and loving sense, 100%, that optimal expression includes physicality, and so a non-physical consciousness cannot provide that. But I think it's a very, very important piece, because one of the biggest traumas of all is the sense of separation from the divine, is the sense of separation from the earth, our environment. We are a part of the natural ecology. And when we look at the disdain and scorn and disrespect for our own bodies and the earth, there is a sense of sadness and grief and disconnection and not belonging to the earth. And when we look at that with our sense of divinity, regardless of our spiritual dogma, most of us, myself included, have rarely had the sense of truly belonging to something divine, to something sacred. It's just metaphysical books and words. More recently, I've been having more of a visceral experience of that. And it's that visceral experience of knowing and being known that is healing. Without that, just with the words, it's not strong enough to heal the shame. And so finding that, I think, is quite important. And if it takes psychedelics to do that, do it. Psilocybin mushrooms are part of nature, and they're part of our biological history. And there are safe therapeutic settings where that can be a profound and very healing experience. DMT is in our pineal gland, and ayahuasca is a compound that produces DMT, and there are places in South America and in the United States where that is legal. These are natural partnerships with our own biology to release and open up more of our own biology and break outside the cultural prison that is the biggest source of shame of all. The cultural prison of taboo, of shame, of denial, of silence, of secrecy and abuse is a profound source of shame. And when you are immersed in a sick culture, and every culture is sick to some degree, you need a counterpoint. You need a sense of yourself outside of the culture. And spirituality, transcendent sexuality, and mushrooms and DMT, ayahuasca, are all the most potent doorways to getting outside so that we can look back and see the beauty, the innate goodness, the true nature of who we are without shame. Thank you so much for watching this segment and honoring our humanity by looking at this possibility of healing and liberation.